hobby since about 2006. I originally had fish back when I was in my 20s, which is in the 90s, late 80s, and got out of it, got back into it, like I said, in 2006. And around 2008, I went to a marine conference in Michigan, and Dr. Frank Marine was there, and he was speaking about bag-eye cardinal fish. And at that point, they were noticing they were becoming threatened in the wild. And in his presentation, he was saying, they're kind of like the guppies of the saltwater world, and everyone should have a pair in their tank, and we shouldn't be collecting them from the wild. And so he kept talking and talking about it. I really thought it was interesting, so I talked to him afterwards, and he's like, it's not rocket science, you can do it, and everything. So I started doing some research, and he was right, it's not rocket science, but it is marine biology. It's not quite as easy as he made it sound. But that's what got me interested in captive breeding. So I started doing some research and started building my fish room. It took me about 3 or 4 months of reading things online, deciding what I wanted to do, and ended up with a pair of clownfish. And before I knew it, I had eggs and I didn't know what to do with them. So eventually I ended up with something looking like this. What we're going to cover today are questions that maybe you guys, if you're thinking about captive breeding, things you might want to know before you get your feet wet or your fins wet. So what I did is basically put a poll online, and I said, if you're interested in captive breeding, what questions do you have? So I narrowed it down to like the top 4 that seems to be like the same ones in all different forums. One of the main things people wanted to know is how difficult it is. Is it really hard? Is it really easy? Is it something that a single person can do? They also want to know if they can breed or raise fish in the reef tanks. That's a real common question. You want to be able to do it in the reef tanks to make it real simple. Another thing, what species should you work with? It's very important deciding which species you want to start with and what you want to progress to. How do I set up a breeding system? How complicated is it? Is it something we can do in a weekend, or is it something that's got to take up a whole room, or your whole life, like some people get sucked into, like myself? We can make a living breeding fish. That's a real top one on a lot of people's list, unfortunately. So how difficult is captive breeding? Basically, it can be as easy or as difficult as you make it. The more difficult species, your butterflies, your angels, wrasses, and things are going to be much more difficult than, say, clownfish or banggai. Some people are big advocates of live phytoplankton. And personally, I started out with growing my own live phytoplankton, but I found it to be kind of time-consuming. Depending on what you're using it for, you don't have to have a specialized phytoplankton, and there's options out there that make your life a lot easier and will save you money in the long run. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Reef Nutrition, Reef Agriculture, their products. They're awesome. They have a system called the Rotigrowth system, which provides excellent nutrition for most basic larval fishes like clownfish and things like that. And providing rotifers for that system. Compared to, there's some good things with the Rotigrowth system. It's very clean. You know, high yield for rotifers. It's got full enrichment of your fatty acids and everything. And for me, it's cost effective. You can also freeze it or refrigerate it too, and it lasts a long time, up to 2 years. Now, live phytoplankton requires more maintenance. That's something you're going to have to light. You're going to have to break the cultures down when they reach their peak. If you're culturing live phytoplankton, it's a single species in most cases, and it's not going to be a balanced nutritional profile. So if you just need the Anachaeropsis, it's fine. But if you need something more like the Mysomas or the other different types of algae, you can only culture them singly, and that can be kind of complicated. Plus, you have to light them, aerate them, like I said, harvest them on a regular basis. So that, for me, was too much time. So I go in and purchase the my 1 liter bag of Rotigrowth Plus I use will last me 200 days to keep 2 5-gallon cultures going. It's in my freezer. I pull out what I need. It's right there whenever I want it. If you go this route, you have to continually work on keeping the culture going. If the culture crashes, you have to start a new one. And it just didn't work out very well in the long run for me, so I stick with the Rotigrow products. And they also have, I use the Rotigrow or Rotigrow Plus, which is a balance, but they also have several ones that are different types of allergies for different types of fish. They've also come out with the breed line, which has a variety of foods for larval fishes, which are just spectacular in my opinion. Starting from the smallest size, which they call A, which is slightly larger than a rotifer. Actually, it looks like dust. And its top dress was astaxanthin to give excellent coloration in fishes like clownfish. You'll see in the next picture different colorations using different dyes. Basically what it is Otahime is a Japanese fish food. It's been around for a long time as far as I know. And they've done this process where you top dress it with this, I can't even pronounce it, astaxanthin. Starts with H anyway. And it boosts the coloration of your larval fish. And if you start that early in the diet, you're going to notice a big difference in the coloration. And it's graded by different sizes, B1, B2. Then they have C1, it used to be C2, but now it's called small, medium, and large, which actually can feed to adult fish. So if you look on the bottom, basic Otahime, that's what your clowns are going to look like. They'll be orange. Clownfish orange, kind of. Cyclopes and Otahime get a little more orange. The TDO, Chroma Boost they call it now, they're great red, orange, awesome looking clownfish. I take mine to the store, put them in a tank next to something from, say, Ore or somewhere, and you can totally tell the difference. And people buy the ones that are raised that look like that. Another thing that can make it more difficult is culturing live foods like copepods, brine shrimp, rotifers. Rotifers are pretty easy once you get them stabilized. But the live foods are very important for nutrition for juvenile, larval and juvenile fishes, and that's where the big roadblocks we're running into right now. Or we're getting past them in certain places, but culturing live foods is very important. Jim, do you know what those are?
Those are
apples.
Those are parvocanos.
Parvos, okay. Something Matt Whittenridge was having some good luck with. But foods like that, they're better nutritional value than rotifers are, different sizes from the knockout to the adults, and they just provide much better results in the long run. If you don't know the basics to start out of keeping a reef tank or even a fish only tank, you're going to have a difficult time. So you really need to know the basics before you get into captive breeding, your husbandry, your species requirements. Some species require a lot of vertical space to spawn in. Mostly your pelagic spawners, your tanks, your basses, anarms not so much, but they're going to be having a pelagic spawning event where they need some vertical space to go up and spawn, where they're not going to do good in a long, shallow breeder tank. Seahorses like taller tanks, so you need to know what your species you're working with, what they require. Knowing live food culturing once again is very important. Conditioning diets, that's something we don't think about a lot with our reef tanks. I mean, we feed our fish, but it's enough to keep them healthy and going. But when you're trying to get fish to breed, you want them to have a really good balanced diet that they're getting all the time. Compare it to all of us going to Burger King every day for every meal, as opposed to eating a nice balanced diet that has, a good balance of protein, a good balance of fat, of vegetable matter, things like that. You need a real nice balanced diet so that the eggs that your fish are producing are viable. A lot of times the fish will spawn, but if they're getting fed, okay, but the eggs aren't going to be any good. So it's going to be kind of wasting your time. I've been talking with a guy in Alberta, somewhere way up north of me, and he's having a lot of problem with die-off with his clowns, right, within the first week or so. He's doing all the right things. I've been with him step after step all week long, believe me, every question he's had. And the only thing we trace it back to is he's not feeding his adults enough. I feed 4 times a day, every day at noon, 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and midnight. And it's a mixed diet of all kinds of, a lot of rods food, some Formula 1, Formula 2, bloodworms, flatworms sometimes. But they get a balance of that all throughout the week, not the same food every single day. But he's only feeding like 2 times a day. I'm like, that's got to be it. I mean, you're getting the eggs to hatch, but they don't have enough nutrition to start with, so they're dying off. Eggs and incubation, or spawning habits, you need to know how your fish are going to spawn. I'm sure everyone here knows that clownfish are going to spawn in a clay pot or on a tile or some type of substrate. That's a demersal spawner. Other fish are pelagic spawners where they spawn in the water column, where the eggs just go everywhere. So you're going to need to know how your fish actually spawn and how to collect the eggs after that. With clownfish, the egg incubation is quite easy. Once your adult male gets it together and knows what he's supposed to do, he takes care of the eggs. Dotty backs are pretty easy. They'll lay in a PVC pipe. Eggs that are released pelagically, that's a little more work. You have to get more involved in like incubating them for however many hours or days you need, and that you need to learn too. And then after they hatch, you need to know what to do with the eggs, or what you need to do with the fry. In the case of clownfish, I pull the tiles on the night that they're supposed to hatch, if I can get it right, and put them in a 10-gallon tank, aerate them, cover the tank, black it out. Usually within probably 45 minutes, I've got a couple hundred little fries in there, hit by timer. And a lot of that is based on the temperature of the tank and the time you're with them. And after that, rearing them and what they need to eat is very important, what type of environment they need to be in. Some like a circular flow in their tank, some like my clowns, I'll put an air stone on one side of the rectangular tank, so I've got the water flow going this way so the fish can kind of sit at the top and the food just comes right to them. It's really easy for them. Seahorses, other types of fish are going to require a more difficult or more distinct environment, trisal tanks like that, something a little more involved, and you need to know what they're going to eat right away. Fishes like your pelagic spawning fish, like tanks and such, they're not going to eat right away because they're what we call prolarva, which you see later on, but they don't have a mouth and eyes developed yet, so you're basically just keeping them moving and keeping them safe from running into things. Where clowns, they need to eat pretty quickly after they're hatched. And you need to have the right food for them. Different species, they're different seahorses, they're ready to eat newly hatched barn shrimp right away after the release. So knowing what to feed them is very important. And patience, that's a big one. People ask me, it's like, oh, I got a pair of clownfish, when are they going to spawn? I'm like, I don't know. And the best thing I can tell you, jokingly, is if you want them to spawn, plan a vacation. Because 9 times out of 10, as soon as I get something set on my calendar, they'll be in a lull or something, and it'll be like 6 days before I'm going away, and everybody starts spawning. And it's like, well, I have to go on. So you really have to be patient. But once they're usually with clownfish and other dotty backs get real regular, I had a pair of orchid dotty backs that are spawning every 7 days. Boom, boom, boom. Clowns, usually you can get them on like a 14-day cycle. If everything's stable, the temperature's stable, the food's stable, you can, doing really good. But you can also have a pair of clowns that for 2 years that aren't doing anything. So you really have to be patient. Now this one we talked about before. Jim likes this one. My question is, can I breed or raise fish in my reef tank? What do you guys think about that? No.
Is that one?
Depending how you define breed and raise, it's possible in few cases. It's not really the way to do it, but it's happening. There's a store in Michigan called Tropicarium, which I don't know if you guys have heard about. It's been in the news for a while, but before they kind of went over that slope, they have big, huge coral baths that are just like probably 20 feet long and 8 or 9 feet just wide. And they have a lot of bangay in there, and lots of coral in there, and lots of copepods and things swimming around in the water. So they can have pairs of bangay in there, and there's babies popping up all the time. Okay, it's a very low flow system, not a lot of predators in there, and that's where I'm giving you the possible part. This is what the baths look like. It's actually a big greenhouse out by the airport in Michigan. It's kind of from the road, it's like a house. You would never know. It's one of the biggest coral propagation places in the country. And but there's probably 4 of those baths in each greenhouse, and I think there's 4 or 5 greenhouses. It's just huge. Some of them have sharks in them, some of them have bangay and corals. And then one section they have this anemone. That anemone looks small, but it's actually about this big. And it's hard to see, but where it's this here we are, there's clowns that are growing in there, and they have hatched there and are being raised in there, and they're okay. It's a very, very specialized system. This is the Long Island Aquarium. I don't know if anybody has been out to see Joe Ilo's tank. And if you look at that, 20,000 gallon tank. There's a big pump up here that flows water around the back of the tank. And every night they put in this big plankton net. And they get all kinds of stuff in there in the morning. Eggs, larvae, coral spawn, everything. Shrimp larvae. So that basically what they're doing, things are actually spawning in the sea. Okay? So that's where I'm getting the possibility. But the problem is, there's too many predators in your basic reef tank for the larvae or eggs to be okay. Pelagic spawn eggs are going to be great, for your corals and all the other fish swimming around in the tank. This is a picture of my old reef tank when it was looking nice. Actually, I'm proud to say I do have every fish in this picture, and that picture was probably from 2007. But everything you can see there that's not a rock or a pump, well, even a pump, is, not so much the clam, but is a predator for a larval fish or a release egg. So it'd be good food for them, but getting fish to live in that type of environment and grow up is pretty much impossible. There's not enough food in our basic reef tank. We tend to keep our reef tanks very, very clean. The water's clean. There's not mounds of copepods coming up to the surface every night like you see in the ocean. So there's not enough food for these larval fishes to eat, which is unfortunate. But we also use a technique called green water, and which is you use the phytoplankton I was talking about earlier to basically tint the water green in our larval tanks. And what that does is also it feeds our rotifers or whatever we have in there, but it limits the density or the depth perception of our larvae. Okay, imagine you've got your little larva and you got really good eyesight, and your whole field of vision is filled with food, and you don't know if that piece is 10 feet away or 100 feet away, but you see it and you're focused on it, so you're going for it. So if it's 100 feet away, it takes a lot of energy to get over there, right? So this little larva fish is using a lot of energy, where if you can only see here, it's going to eat what's right behind it. So what the green water does is actually limits their depth perception, so they can't see all the way around. But if you do that to your tank continuously, your corals will be happy for a little bit, but not for very long. It's going to end up like pea soup. And also, if anyone has a reef tank, you probably have a vortex or some other type of high flow pump. And that's really good for chopping up eggs and making them into mush. And larval fish, and just making them into more food for the fish and corals in your tank. So a reef tank is just not really an ideal place to raise your fish. They will be spawning. Chances are, anyone that's got two fish of the same species or a harem of certain species, chances are they're probably spawning whether or not you see them or not. But whether or not anything's going to happen, it's probably not. And water quality issues, pumping out all those eggs and other chemicals they're doing while they're spawning is not really that good for a continuous thing to be going on in your tank. And keeping the high levels of phytoplankton in there is going to create water quality issues for you. What species should I work with? Is anyone here breeding fish? What's that? Anyone here breeding fish?
I did.
You did? Okay. What'd you work with?
Clownfish.
Okay. Just oscillars, perculas?
I had 28 different pairs.
Okay, cool. And you got out because
They got to be real cheap.
we'll get into that one in a little bit. Yeah, that's another story. But the question is, what should you work with? Did you pick clowns because they were easy or because you liked them?
I wanted to try it. Then you kind of got addicted to like collecting clownfish. And 1 to 2 pairs turned into like 28 pretty quick.
Okay. Usually I say start with an easy species that you can learn with. Matt Wiggerich, if any of you know him, he has the opposite mindset, saying start with something difficult. And his idea is that if you start with something difficult, you don't know what you're doing, you might do something that somebody that's been breeding fish would never think of. And you might stumble across something that actually really works. And that's the problem with these more difficult fish, is we don't know what works. So someone that's been breeding for a while, you're not going to try something that sounds really, really crazy. Whereas if you're brand new and you're just saying, oh, I'm going to grab these 2 wrasses and try this, you might stumble on something that actually breaks the code that we can get through. But for myself, I like to start with something a little easier so I can learn the basics, and that's kind of the way I learn, but to each their own. Fish to start with, easy fish to start with. Obviously your clowns, was a pair of mine. It's one of their earlier batches, not many. There's 200 eggs in there. Bangais. I used to, if you've noticed, but we're getting so many imported from Asia. What's the average Bangai price around here? Does anyone know? In the stores?
$12.
Okay. Those are the ones that are coming in from Asia that are being captive bred over there, which is great. But it's lowered the price for breeders so low that it costs too much money for me to raise Bangai to the size and sell them for $3 or $4. I mean, I just can't do it. And there's so many thousand coming in from Asia, it's not worth it. So right now, I've been wanting to get a pair of Bangai, but since this has been going on, it's like I'm not going to bother because it's just not remotely profitable. Seahorses are always a good option. They're relatively easy depending on what species you have. I'm sure you know the males hold the eggs. They hatch inside the male's pouch and they're released. And most species will eat newly hatched brine shrimp right away. So that's a nice species to start with. Plus they're a cool looking fish. Another thing to think about if you're thinking is choosing a species that you like. Don't pick a fish if you don't really care for it because you're not going to care about it enough to follow through and keep up with it. If there's a certain species, or if you like platinum clowns, or you really like orchid dotty backs, something like that, work on that, focus on it because it's something you really want that you like looking at on a daily basis. When you're choosing a species, make sure you have the right environment for it, the right kind of tank, which we'll get into in a little while, and a species that is compatible with your time budget. How much time do you have to spend with your fish? Do you have time to spend feeding 10 times a day? Or you only have time to feed, a couple times a day. Do you have big tanks, short tanks, long tanks? You need to know these things before you decide on the fish. Or you can decide on the system and then decide the fish afterwards, but I think it's better to start with fish. A good thing to keep in mind, I don't do this to get rich, obviously. And I do it because I love doing it, but you still gotta make a little money to make ends meet so you're not getting poorer instead. So check around with your local stores that are interested in captive bred fish and see, ask them what species do your customers want? What would you like to have captive bred coming into your store? Keep that in mind when you're choosing a fish. What I did after I conquered the more simpler things, I moved up to more difficult species and kind of just got stuck because I started traveling around and doing more things. But once you learn the basics, then you can try tackling more complicated things. Another thing is a lot of people get focused on one species clownfish, and they get stuck there. And what they do, unless they're selling all around the country, you're going to flood their local market really easily because there's only so many people in your geographical area that are going to want clownfish. A lot of your Ocellaris and basic Perculas, most stores will usually take those, and they're kind of a bread and butter fish. Maroons, the saddlebacks, and the Clarkie complex, the tomatoes. Your market for those is going to be very, very small. Nobody's going to want very many of those. Even your stores are going to take maybe 2 at a time. Whereas with your regular Ocellaris and Perculas, you can usually sell 20 or 30 at a time per store. And if you're only focused on clowns, that's how you're going to sell. You're going to only be raising a couple batches a year of that, unless you really branch out and sell around the country. Different species work, but I worked with this species of orange-billed dottyback for a while until the male got too cranky and killed his mate. But what was nice about these fish was you could tell their sex by their color. Even though they're called the orange peel, and it was stated in many places that was the male, that's actually the female. The male looks just the same except the orange stripe is purpley blue. But unfortunately when I got them from Covington and La Aquaria, I didn't really pay attention to how big they were. And they're a good sized 4-inch fish. And the only place they had at the time was a 10-gallon tank. And that didn't go well. It went well okay at the beginning. They spawned once, he started getting cranky. And so I divided them, and no matter how well I divided them in the tank, he got over there. Eventually ended up killing her off, but that was just one thing. Yellow assessors have been down in captivity, and they're a cool fish. I don't know, are they available around here at all locally? I have a hard time finding them home.
Not very often.
They're such cool fish because they hang out upside down. These have been done in captivity. Scooter bunnies are getting real popular right now. Those are more flat spawning fish, which needs a little more rise area or height. Mandarin gobies. Unfortunately, people aren't wanting to pay the price for these. Kind of unfortunate. But there's endless possibilities out there. I'd love to be able to raise Antheus in captivity, but that's more of a harem type environment where you have several elements, more circle or more area in the tank. Bigger tanks like Joe's 20,000 gallon, I'm sure they're doing all the time. But as far as I know, I don't even know if the name was attempted these, but it's like I said, endless possibilities. Wisdom, these damsels, which have basically no commercial value, but he was able to raise those, which is kind of cool. More of Matt's fish. In that picture, at that time, I think there's 1, 2, 3, 6 or 8 different species. They got all at the same time or on the same stage. So I just thought that was a really cool picture. And the orange spotted filefish, Matt Peterson. Everyone knows Matt Peterson. Talks a lot, writes big long posts. He was the only one in the world that has raised these to almost selling size. And everyone was worried about, or everyone seems to be worried about sharing their information with people about their spawning regimens and how they get things like this. Well, he shared every information, every second of what he did to get things to spawn, and no one's done it again since. This is where it started out. If you know Matt, you know he actually counted all those 1,004.5 hours. He's like that. That's. I wish you'd say how many days or, give me a little bit of idea, but that's what they're starting out looking like. And at 60 and 74 days post-hatch, they're already fully colored up. They're not big, of course, but they're looking like adult colored fish. And that's just over 2 months, which is amazing. I mean, I can't get, my clowns will look like adults in that short time, but it takes probably 4 to 5 months before I can sell them. Sunrise dotty back is cool. I wish that was my tank, but I know where I no longer have my female. But that's a fairly marketable species. That's a little bad picture of a little one settled out. Settlement is basically when you start out fish hatch and they go through a larval stage, and they're basically like 2 eyes, a mouth, and a body, and they just start developing their fins. They pretty much stay in the water column. But they get to a point with clownfish, it's usually about day 8 and day 12, depending on your water temperature and species. They will do what we call settle or metamorphosize, and that's where they start taking on the trait of an actual fish. Their fins develop, they start getting away from the water column, they'll settle towards the bottom, that's where settlement comes from. And they're big enough to eat larger foods. So the settlement period is something that's really important. Sometimes it can be really dramatic. And like with my orchid dottybags, these are sunrise big orchids, they can almost overnight go from like a clear little like minnow looking thing, and all of a sudden the next day or two they're fuchsia, which happened to be on my first batch. I was raising them at that time in a young tank with live phytoplankton, and it was green, like bright green pea soup. And I put tons of eggs in there, larvae in there, and they just disappeared. And I thought, well, okay, they're gone. But the phytoplankton was growing really, really well. And I'm like, well, I'll keep the phyto going. And I was culturing tiger pods, Reed's tiger pods outside, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and culture them inside. So I brought some tiger pods in and put them in there. A couple days later, they're all gone. I'm like, well, I'll put some more in. At this point, I couldn't see this deep in the tank, so it's just green. And I kept putting more and more tiger pods, and I'm like, what am I doing wrong here? One day I'm standing here looking at the next tank, and out of the corner of my eye in this green tank, I see this purple flash. And I'm like, I have a stroke. And I looked, and I'm standing there, and I'm staring. All of a sudden I see it again, and I'm just like freaking out. So I'm running to get my camera, and I'm online, and God, it won't settle, Previous to this, I had taken the heater out, all it was in there. I turned the light off, I had an air stone going, and that was it. And so I got a picture of it, show everybody, and I got one settled, And so I plug the heater back in, turn the light back on, and a couple days later, I go in there and I see it again. It's like twice as big. Oh, there's no way this is growing this fast. But that's what was eating my tiger pods. They had settled out when I wasn't paying attention. And so, long story short, I started draining the tank out, and what it wasn't they were growing so fast, but there was like 6 of them in there of different sizes that had all settled out on me. So that was pretty fun. Anyway, blennies are always a good choice. like the one I don't know what kind of that yellow one was today. It's a really cute little plane. And but the big challenge are our angelfish species. My friend Karen, well, actually Kevin Resendez posted that, but Karen Britton in Hawaii, who I was lucky enough to visit a year ago in February, has been raising these. Butterflies are being worked on by Tropical Agriculture Lab in Florida, starting to work on those and having some success. Wrasses would be nice because you can tell the sex difference by the coloration. It's a lot of marine fish, you can't tell the males from the females unless, based on size. So like with wrasses and that, there's obviously a male and a female. Flame angels, there's been some success with. That is my favorite fish, which I can't have because my tank's too small. But it would be an awesome fish to be able to breed in captivity because it's one of the larger angelfish and a very pretty fish. Swiss guard basslets and rock candy black basslets have been done by Todd Gardner at the Long Island Aquarium. And I don't know, have you guys seen these pictures? This is one of, he didn't know at the beginning which species it was. He had both the tanks, or both those fish spawning in the tank. And the weird thing is a pendant, or whatever this is, coming off the back of the larval fish. And Todd, the last I talked to him, he didn't know what it was. He's never figured it out, to my knowledge. There's a video I'll show you in a minute, you can see how it moves, but even if one of those little bubbles is broken off, another will grow back. So I tend to think it's a lure to keep predators away from it. That's my theory. Whether or not, I don't know. But this is a very tiny fish at this point. Not even subtle because there's no coloration going on yet. But it has a nice coloration in the eyes, big mouth, nice full gut there, but it's still got the streamer on. And that's 40 days after it's hatched. So that's like a month and a half that it's been in this tank. That's just an open mouth feed me picture. And he's still not knowing which species this is yet. And it's 69 days, it's still, you can see, it still has a little streamer going up on there. And it's just about getting close to settlement. 69 days. It's getting a little more color. And that's when you're starting to see stripes. It still looks like the Swiss guard, or it could be either one, because you know if the coloration is finished yet. At 100 days, it still has the streamer going on. Now, let's see. This is how this moves. At 100 days, the streamer is kind of buoyant still. I don't know if it's keeping the larval in the water column, or if, like I said, if it's a lure to keep predators away from it, or what it is. But the fact that it grows back means it's there for a reason.
How big is that fish?
That fish probably is like,
Centimeter?
oh no, probably a couple million, half a centimeter at most. I mean, he was raising these, if I remember correctly, they were probably 100-gallon, like round blue barrels, plexiglass on the side, and just pumping them full of cocoa pods and stuff to see, just the whole kitchen sink, what will this fish eat? And there weren't that many in there, so it's got all that stuff floating around. It's cool. But unfortunately, this was in the back part of Long Island Aquarium, where the tours come through all the time, and it was like you had to kind of walk by it, so it was constantly being pumped. So it was not an ideal laboratory situation. But and then actually, it pulls it up to the top of the water surface with that little streamer thing. Did I miss one? Okay. Moving on to Florida. My buddy Matt Whitrich on the right up there, Eric Castellano on the left, and some girl, Christine, who I don't know, works down at the Tropical Aquaculture Lab, TAL, like the name, at the University of Florida. And they've been working with a lot of different things. They've worked with the Eniacus bannerfish, and had some good luck with that. And they're hoping to get that to be a replacement in the reef tanks for Morris idols, which have a poorer success rate, whereas bannerfish are much hardier in that respect. And what fun thing they're doing down in Florida is they're partnering with other zoos and aquariums with bigger tanks. They're having fish spawning in them all the time, every night, like Long Island Aquarium, the Columbus Zoo. What they do is they'll put in nets or collectors of some sort every night and collect eggs or larvae and bag them up and send them down to Eric and them at the Tropical Aquaculture Lab, and they will start to try to raise them up and see what they got. So what they can do down there is they can pull in larvae and eggs from different sources where they wouldn't ever be able to have all these different species in one spot down in this lab because they don't have that much money. And they throw them out in these large tanks, which are basically very slow trickle overflow filters, depending on the stage of the larva, where water's dripped in and it's slowly flowing out the side and being replaced. And this is one of the collection situations they do. I'm not sure if that was Columbus or not, but basically this is skimming off the top of the water at night. The fish are spawning pelagically, releasing the eggs to the water column. The water is skimmed off and coming through this into like a mesh filter pad. So they'll take that mesh filter pad in the morning out, gently scrape it off into a bag, ship them down to the guys at the lab, and they'll start raising them. This is the life cycle of the bannerfish that Wick did. And let's see down there. I think there was 27 days down at the bottom. It starts out probably very, very small. That's 41 days. That one died, unfortunately. They had Korean angelfish that were such, everyone knows what Korean angelfish looks like, right? That settled out in approximately 40 days. So that settled that far in 26 days, which we thought would never be possible with angelfish. We never thought that we would get that far.
And how big is that again? I'm just trying to gauge.
Figured, I would say that's probably half a centimeter, maybe a little bigger than that. I'm trying to tell what's in there for food that's floating around. Yeah, probably.
It's just hard to get perspective.
Right,
I know.
He also worked with the crested oyster goby, which is a bizarre looking fish. He's on acid or something. I've never seen it before. I still wish did it, but it's the life cycle of that. And he needs to put in like measurements on these pictures, but the pictures look so cool. These had success with those. Hi-hats settling out fairly quickly. And I don't have the dates on that, but that's already taken on. It's gone from that like blob looking fish into actually looking like a fish. French grunts they've also worked with. Obviously not real big in the aquarium hobby. Chromas they've done, which very little financial impact, but it's another damsel species fish. Now we have a breeder down in Australia who's been working with these guys. And he's had pretty good luck, better than pretty much anyone I've heard of so far. And this is just an average hobbyist like myself. And these are eggs that are 30 minutes after they've been spawned. So you can see basically just a little bit of the body, and the circle is an oil globule, like the yolk of an egg. And here you can see that the little oil globule is smaller now. It's starting to use that energy up to grow. And this is what a prolarva looks like. It's basically a bubble with fat in it and like a nervous system. No eyes, no mouth yet. So these are floating around the ocean every time they spawn, and we have to recreate that environment now on our tanks. And as it slowly starts to grow, that fatty oil globule is starting to be used up. So you have to be ready right after. As soon as they start being able to eat, you have to have the right food. But this is only one day. It's gone from that big to that small. And this is when it's starting to, the eyes are starting to show up, the mouth is starting to show up. And basically, that's as far as he's gotten the last I heard. But it's further than anyone else has gotten. Now back to clownfish, Matt's. Everyone's seen Matt's lightning maroon. He's got one of two fish. One a couple years ago was harvested in the wild. Well, these are some of his offspring. And they were sold for a ridiculous amount of money on eBay. And if anyone was following, I think one was $10,000 they sold for. And Matt didn't get hardly any of that money because of the deal that he made to get the fish, which was a good deal, but he didn't profit hugely off the maroon clown, and he's trying to continue that strain in captivity. It's just a really cool fish. Now my friend Karen Britton in Hawaii is working with an Watanabe angelfish. And 19 days post-hatch. Pretty much a mouth and 2 big eyes. 19 days. And that's at 50 days. Getting coloration. I don't know if that would be, I guess that would be considered settled at that point. And I think that's a picture I took at this campground. But I was able to see that when I was there 2 years ago. And these two on the bottom are 87 days old. So that's really quickly, but she's lucky out there in Hawaii. She's using live photoplastics harvesting out of the ocean, so she has that benefit. Now she's working with the purple mask angelfish, and the picture on the right is 125 days after hatch, which is quite a long time. Keeps on going. And this picture actually hasn't been published yet. You're the second people on the planet since I don't think she's published yet, but it's not that picture, so I dug that or got it from her right before I left her. But she's making progress. And she had mail, and she did was it Indiegogo or some type of funding to get the female. And that was last fall, and she's gotten this far in 6 months. So it's pretty amazing. And she's not rich. She's got 2 jobs. She lives in Hawaii. And, anyway, our holy grail here, of course, is yellow tang. If we can do yellow tangs, we're going to make a lot of people happy. University of Florida down. This information is a little old. I don't know if it's been updated since I talked to him last. They were getting between 30 and 100,000 eggs collected each night, depending on the time of the month where the moon cycle was.
Are they collecting those in the wild, or are they collecting those from other?
The ones they use for rootstock,
Yeah.
I'm sure they got them from the wild. They had a huge pond that they had them in. And
The eggs, you mean the eggs are being collected from tanks where they're breeding though?
Oh, they have the rootstock in the tank.
Right.
Yeah, they're not collecting the eggs in the wild.
That's
Okay, sorry about that. And they were getting, raising them today 7 or 9 in decent numbers. And some of them they were keeping alive for 14 days. And they were dying off. So that's telling you that there's something that they're missing. They're not getting the right food at the right time. Now, the oceanic Institute in Hawaii has gotten to 50, well, it's gotten further than 50 days actually. But you can actually see how they're starting to take on more of a tang-like shape. And that's anywhere from 15 to 50 days. And they were using Arbocalis, I think, cocopods. And they've gotten him to 83, and they named this one Lucky because he was lucky he was the last one they've gotten 83 days. And as far as I know, that's as oldest anyone's gotten in captivity, the yellow tangs. But it's promising. It's better than 10 days. And they're such a pretty fish. In every reef tank you see, there's a yellow tang. And that's one of the big things that the anti-aquarium hobby or people out there are upset about is us taking yellow tangs out of the wild. So if we can do something where we can breed them in captivity, maybe it'll chill them out a little bit. I don't know. These came out the first of this year, the new species done by ORA. Eastern bluefish, which I've never even heard of, but it's cool looking fish. Gold flake maroon, these other fish are just some of the new species that ORA's been working with.
What is that one in the middle?
That's the gold flake maroon. It's like a platinum version of a maroon. It's actually, oops. It starts out pretty much white, and as it gets older, all the white hair gets golder and golder and golder. It's really quick break. I have one in my house pet. And then we have this, what is it? Pikefish? The Jim's done, and he's basically the first person in the world that's been able to reproduces fish in captivity. It's actually a beautiful pipefish. They're not endemic to Hawaii, are they?
They are.
They are endemic?
Yes.
A friend of mine, Matt Ross, who I went diving with a year and a half ago, he went out and collected broodstock for Jim to work with. You'll be hearing more about that later on today, but it's another species to work with. Now this is kind of a joke because I don't think it's real, but it was on the internet, so it's got to be real, right? That's a marlin larva.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
neat.
And who knows, you know, maybe we can get into mammals too. Okay, moving on from species, let's talk about systems. First of all, determine how much room you have. If you get a room like this, I want to move in. I would love a lot of room, but your space requirement, or the space you have, is really going to determine how you set things up. You want to work on making your system functional and designed to fit the space that you have. Google SketchUp I'm not good at, but it's a cool tool where you can spin the room around and actually put things in and measure to see how things are going to fit and how you're going to be able to walk between certain tanks and stuff. This was kind of like my system. It's a little different than that, but it gives you a nice idea of what you can do. At that point I was working on these black brown tub systems over here under the window. I was going to do a blue and black one, never probably will. But basically set up on cinder blocks, so I was trying to plot this out at that time. This is my original system. I got the rack from a friend of mine, so I couldn't alter it too much. I'm not a carpenter. So I set it up with 6 broodstock tanks on the top. They're all flown down to the left. They go through a filter stock, filter pad, bioballs, a skimmer section, a refugium, and there's also a K1 reactor in there now. And then we pump back up to the top. The second level is 4 20-gallon tanks, which is my original grow-out section, which is plumbed to the sump on the right, which is basically exactly the same, except it doesn't have live sand in it. The other one does. So that worked for a while until I decided that I needed more room. And this is my hatching station I use for clowns. Basically, very ghetto, very cheap. 4 10-gallon tanks, flip lights from Home Depot, a metal rack from Baker's Rack, I'll show you in a minute, milk cartons from the store, and a piece of wood, and air, stone, and heaters. That's all I use for my hatching my clowns out. And they're green with that green water that I was talking about previously. This is that rack where I used the shelf from. I did have a frag tank for a while. It's now a seahorse tank, and that's where I was culturing phytoplankton up at the top. And I have a tank tumbler down here on the bottom I was using for body back eggs. I could hatch them within probably 15 minutes if I pull them at the right time. And then rotor for culturing down on the bottom, which I still have the same buckets from the same spot within a couple inches. And it works great. The shelves are movable. The things on wheels, you can move it around. It does. I should have painted it because it's getting a little rusty, unfortunately. That's what the seahorse tank in now, which just doesn't have seahorses anymore. I tried copepod culturing and I didn't have good enough luck to continue it because I wasn't keeping my culture sterile enough. But I found they work better in flatter, wider tanks. I don't know. Are you having better luck with taller tanks now or no?
Yeah, I'm using carboys.
Carboys, okay. This was like 4 years, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. So this is another plan that I started out when I was setting up my BRT system. I was going to do a UV and have a whole refugium and all this stuff. And this is kind of just an example of how things change. I kind of, once I started going on it, decided I didn't want to buy all this new equipment. So I ended up doing it out the turf scrubber on the bottom. And once again, this is very ghetto, 2 buckets, no one on the bottom for the sump, cinder blocks, 2 by 10s or something on the top. An old refugium is my turf scrubber. Water just drains through that, goes through the screen, and that's the only filtration I have going on in the system. And I was using that for raising orthocarditis and having decent luck until I lost a few. Now, about 2 years ago, this was the other side of that room, and there's a lot of crap in there, so but I had this empty space, or this full closet, and with all kinds of old clothes from my parents that really didn't need to be around. It's like, I just really wish I could have some more room, and there was this desk full of junk, and it's like, So I'm thinking, if I move that desk, I'll get 6 more feet. So So I'm like, to a breeder, that's like prime. So I got creative and emptied out the closet, moved the desk into the closet, or I had a cedar chest that went in the closet. The desk is now in front of the closet, and I built a new system. This is now my grow system, and I was able to build it myself, so I could make it to size to fit as many tanks as I wanted in that particular spot. So there's actually five on each level now, and I haven't even plumbed the top section because I haven't filled out the bottom. I had this black stuff. But it was nice to be able to build my rack exactly to fit the space of the tanks that I wanted. And I've catch kind of checks things out and make sure everything's working okay. But that's all that's filtered is throw a filter sock into that green little thing you see there. It's a plastic bucket with holes in it, and it's full of K1 medium. The water drains into K1 and keeps it churning. That's the only filtration I have going on there. I siphon detritus out of there once in a while when these guys start pooping all over the place. It gets kind of messy. But
What's K1 medium?
it's a little, what's a pasta it looks like? Like a small
Little
cylinder.
pinwheel pasta.
Like a pinwheel pasta, but a little longer. It's something they've used in koi ponds and stuff for years.
Is it Sony or is it plastic?
Plastic.
Plastic.
But it,
It's like bioballs.
yes and no,
but
but it's
just-
neutrally buoyant. So it doesn't float, doesn't sink. And so when it keeps going, it cleans itself off. It has a really high surface area. It's not cheap, but it works really well.
It's engineered to where the surface area for the volume is quite high, even compared to bioballs.
Yeah.
And it's self-cleaning if you keep it tumbling.
Right, because it constantly is knocking the old stuff off and then repopulating the foam. And it's not, like, I have it in a bucket there. My reactor, my other thing is basically a 2-liter bottle with holes cut in it with an air stone, so water is being flushed through it. So it's not any big mechanical thing. It's just, other than buying the media, it doesn't cost you anything to run. This is another breeder setup over on the other side of my state. This guy, he bought his house because of the basement. When he was shopping for the house, he would go, and his wife would look in the house, and he'd go to the basement. And he'd come upstairs and say, "Yeah." And he'd go to another place, and go to the basement, and come up there. So we walked into this place, walked downstairs, we walked upstairs, we're buying it. And high ceilings, like, not quite as high as this, but almost probably the top of there. All cement, everything. Drains in the floor. He had all the wiring done up on the ceiling. All DIY, cinder block and wood racks. The DIY skimmer over there, which is probably this tall, or taller. And these are his grow out tubs in the middle. These are 50 and 100 gallon tubs. And that's it. And that's Peterson up there on the top. You can kind of see the density he's got going on in here. That's one of his filtrations. It's basically these little sprinkler contraptions that spin around, spray water over the bioball. That's after the skimmer, I think. It skims and goes to that. I mean, it goes to that and then the skimmer probably. It's been a long time since I've been there. But that's his stocking densities in his 100-gallon tubs. But as you can see, if you look at those fish, they're not being fed TDO because they're not bright green orange. But that was before TDO was out. This is Karen down in Hawaii. Her breeding system, I told her she wasn't rich, that's in her garage, where she's working with bandits and whatnot, the angels and stuff. And it's probably not very big, but she was raising bandit larvae in there when I was there. And it's basically an acrylic hexagon inside a 50-gallon drum wrapped with insulation. And a couple pods are being dripped in from the top as food and then overflowing out. Basically, the water in the blue keeps the temperature stable. And that's her banded pair. And she has, get out of here size. I think the PVCs are probably, what would that be, 5, whatever size that would be. Good sized fish. Okay. Other thing to keep in mind is your budget, how much money you got to spend. With your breeding system, you don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars unless you want it to look pretty or if it's in a very high traffic area of your house, which you don't want a breeding system to be anyway. Most of my stuff is used, except for that new system I did buy all new. Always buy new heaters, which is a no-brainer. But you usually can find used tanks online that you can drill. You know, I mean, as long as they hold water, you can use them. You get a lot of stuff at Home Depot. Keep in mind your species requirements if they need a tall tank, a short tank, a long tank, things like that. And
how much time you have. If you don't have a lot of time, don't set up 50 tanks. I mean, I don't spend as much time as I used to in my breeding room, but it's enough for me now. But like Edgar, whose room I showed you a minute ago, he feeds 10 times a day. So his wife feeds 5 and he feeds 5. So if you've got that time, sure, go for it. But if you don't get a system that requires a lot of time. And basic common sense, like in every hobby, which some of us have. It's just, you make a living breeding fish. You said no, right? It's hard for a while, yeah. Don't count on it. I mean, once you're going and establish a brand, you can start making money. If you really push it, you probably should start making a profit. But do it because you enjoy it. I do it because I love it. I don't try to make money. I'm breaking even now. I think I might be making $20 a month or something. But I do it because I enjoy it.
What's that breakdown to per hour?
Yeah, don't even go there. Honestly, I've saved every receipt since 2008. I have it in a folder, but I open it up and put the receipt in there and close it back up because I don't want to, and I have no idea of hours. But profit can be made. It just takes time. Dealing with reputable fish stores, if you're going to sell your fish, I have not been to any stores around here, but you know what I'm talking about. Some you can go to, some you won't. And it's the same with selling your fish as with buying your fish. The problem we're having right now is competing with the big guys, and that's what's turning a lot of breeders off. Some of the big 3, I think you know the 3 I'm talking about, that are having price wars. Well, at least the big 2 out of the big 3. And it's reduced the prices of clowns down to where it's almost impossible to compete with. I mean, normally I would sell my Oscillarius or Procula clown for $7 a piece to a local fish store, which is fine. That more than cuts even gives me a little bit of profit, but that's 6 months of work. Okay, and that fish is over an inch in length. Now the wholesalers are now starting to sell them for $3 a piece, and I can't do that. That's basically me paying you to take my fish. So what's I'm understanding is one is trying to force the other one out of business, and basically it's driving the price down. And I don't like the thought of saltwater fish being so cheap that it's cheaper than your latte you got on the way here, that it's just disposable if it dies, you don't care. So that really bugs me. I know they need to make money, but I think they're just trying to drive it down to the lowest common denominator, and it's not doing good for any of us. So, enough rant about just simple things to think about if you're looking to sell your fish to a store that you would probably think about if you were buying fish there. But the big thing is, ask them if they want captive bred fish, because some will. Some will already have captive bred fish and be like, oh yeah, we want whatever you can get. And then there's going to be some stores that aren't so interested. I was speaking in Long Island, and I got to this point in my talk, and I said, yeah, just talk to the stores about captive bred fish, and this guy stood up, he didn't stand up, he's like, yeah, we don't want your fish, I don't want to buy your fish. And so this is exactly what came to mind. And I was stunned at the time, that it's kind of like, I don't know you, like, come on, buy me. Yeah, and I'm like, and I didn't know what to say. Unfortunately, Todd and Joe jumped in real quick and said something so I could catch up. And I'm thinking, it's like, this is great. This is exactly what I'm trying to say. It's like there's some store owners that don't get it. They see the bottom line is the price. They see a wild caught bang guy coming in for X dollars and a captive bred coming in for X dollars plus 5. Where if you take the captive bred fish, you might have half of them die off. So you pay less, but you're still not having as many fish to sell. So that's things where they're not seeing that if you pay a little more for a fish, some hobbyists don't understand this. You pay a little more for a fish that's captive bred, it's eating good food, it's parasite free, it's not being shipped from Indonesia, it's being shipped from down the street. You might pay a little more, but you're saving money by because you're only buying 1 fish instead of 2 or 3 or whatever. But that's something, some stores will get it, and some stores won't. Provide a real high quality product. Some of the fish I've seen come out of the big 2, one more the big 1, just the coloration isn't good, their finish isn't really good. You want orchid dotty bags that look like orchid dotty bags, not with overbites or underbites. You want a bright coloration.
Do you call?
Boy, Brent coming. Oh, sorry. I'm getting there. Getting ahead. Mandarins look like mandarins. These are what fish are supposed to look like, but some of the they were just kind of pale yellow and their fins weren't formed right. I've seen clowns with underbites and things like that. And it's like, these shouldn't be sold to the public because they see that and think, oh, when I first started looking at clowns, I was sold a bulldog clown because I thought he was cute. Well, I didn't realize it was something you shouldn't be culling because the gills were deformed. These are some of my fish, a bunch of platinum or Picasso offspring. And these are a pair of Picasso platinums that I got. They sold for a ridiculous amount of money. And if you're familiar with the platinums, they're mostly white with orange and black. Well, these didn't have hardly any orange on them. And they were small, growing very slowly. And I just took a picture of them one day and I thought they were cool. So I called them platinum pandas. And I put them on Facebook. Well, then their bidding war starts. And I might not want to sell them at all. And so finally I said, whoever is the highest bidder at this date, a couple days from now, I really went for $750. So that paid for that whole green system that I had done. But that was not my intent, but it's like, what the heck? That's an artsy pic. So if you want seahorses that are looking like regular seahorses, educating your local fishers and other hobbyists is important. Other hobbyists sometimes don't understand. I know some friends of mine, it's like, you'll see a fish, or somebody's talking about fish, how much is it? Like, you gotta understand there's more to our fish than just the prices of it. And compromising integrity. There is a time when you have to cull fish when they have deformities of sort. I haven't had many issues, so I didn't have a lot of pictures. I asked my buddy Matt, I said, can you give me some pictures? And I said, oh yeah, I got some. So he made me promise I would put this disclaimer in that these fish were never sold, they were culled. And you can see why. The smushed in faces, these are just examples of fish that should not make it into the marketplace, but I've seen them go in. Not these particular ones, but these are examples. Hunchbacks. The fish that I think Ori calls the stubbies clowns. It's the only thing that's with that is missing a vertebrae. It's not anything special. It's actually a deformity. Improper finish. Some of these fish that fins are just not formed properly. Sorry, Nemo. The humpback is really bad. There's one coming up here. That's my one that I had to call. And that fish is not moving. It's sitting still. It's not. And I hated to do it because it was Picasso, and he was fine in the tank. Nobody picked on him. He was eating. But it was just so sad that I had to finally get some clove oil. And I've been lucky. I haven't had to call a lot. Usually, when you're seeing deformities like this, it's usually a nutritional issue right during the settlement metamorphosis phase, or after that, or the punch-in nose is usually from running into things before they're settling. Basically, if they ran into the walls 20,000 times, it would do something to you too. But those are things you have to get rid of, and having a quality control inspector will help you. She doesn't eat them; she just looks.
Sure.
As far as I know. Okay, so where do we go from here? That's a good question. There's research out there. There's tons of information. When I started, there wasn't a lot of information. There was information out there, but it was very difficult to find. It was very convoluted. Talking with other people, there's a lot of us breeders out there with big mouths now that are talking. And one thing I'm really big on is sharing information. And there's some people that are very close with what they're doing. They don't want to share it. Like with people that told Matt not to share his information on the file search, like, oh, you can't share anything, everyone's going to use it to get rich. It's like, no one's done it. So a lot of the big companies don't want to share what they're doing, but I'm really big on sharing my information and encouraging other people to get into it or just talk about it. Now, back in 2010, myself and a friend of mine in Michigan started what we call a Greek Breeding Initiative, which is the shirt vector. And what it is, basically, it's real prominent in the freshwater hobby. It's called a Breeders' Award Program, where you create journals online for each individual pair of fish you're breeding. And fish are rated on difficulty, and like A, B, C, and D. A's being real simple to do, D's being real difficult or almost impossible to do. And they're graded by points. And then there's 4 different milestones: your spawn event, your hatch event, your settlement event, and 60 days post. Each time you have one of those events, you fill out a report and link your journal to that with all the proofs that you did it. Once it's approved by 3 members of the MBI Council, you are awarded your points. And then once you get all 4 steps for that species, you get a little icon. Some people think the points are really cool. I couldn't care less, but math equates into baseball or some game like that. We were playing for points for your team. But we also have a workshop once a year, which we're getting people from all over the country and Canada coming to now. We give out awards to the different breeding. There's different levels you go to. Each summer we do that. And anybody know Martin Moe? Or heard of Martin Moe?
Yep.
He's in the white bill on the bottom there. That was last year and the year before. That's us just kind of playing around outside afterwards. But the MBI site is somewhere, if you're even remotely interested in captive breeding, you can go in there and search by species, you can search by breeder. We have over 1,100 and probably 30 different reports that have been approved in the last 4.5 years. Breeders from all over the world: the United States, UK, North America, South America, Australia. Not too much from Asia. Actually, none from Asia. The Asians are they don't breed, or they don't want to share, because I can't think of anyone from Asia that's posted on the site. But we also recognize species first. Matt Peterson's filefish and Richard Ross is our cuttlefish, first people in the world to do this. And Jim Whitefish are on that list. They just haven't gotten quite enough approval yet.
Pending about 1 more vote.
I don't remember how many. I know it's more than 3. So,
Yeah.
But we have these things approved by people go through and check all the information, make sure that there's no other proof of someone doing this in the past. But that's something that we really strive for, is recognizing what people have done in the past. And generally have fun. This is just like the reef hobby. It's a little more intense. It's a little more focused, but it's really fun. And remember only one thing. I would normally agree with the statement, because I love Yoda. But in this case, I don't say do or do not, there is no try. I say be willing to fail and try again, because you will fail. I did. My first trial was clowns. I wasn't ready, didn't have my rotifers ready, and I had 2. I got 2 to survive. And as Matt Pearson said, that's all you need to do. So it's just, invariably you're going to have issues. You're not going to have rotifers in time, or you have rotifers and then no real spawn. It's just something you, once again, really need patience for. But you can make a difference by talking to other people and sharing what you learn, and things like that, or events like this. So, is there any questions?
Yeah, I went to your website.
Yes. Which one? The MBI one?
They posted the link on there.
This one?
The one you just shown.
Okay.
There was a link on the thread. I was really interested to find out what type of